Do not obey in advance. Most of the power of authoritarianism is freely given. In times like these, individuals think ahead about what the more repressive government will want, then offer themselves without being asked. A citizen who adapts in this way is teaching power what it can do. Timothy Snyder, on Tyranny.
I don't think that they so much cared about the USAID or the staff. I think that their vindictiveness was just in sort of a sense of arrogance, in that their job was to eliminate waste. And they saw foreign aid as waste because they didn't know what it did. They were just kind of told that. And so their job was to break our systems. And so the idea of like listening to experts was, my guess is that they had been sort of trained that, to the extent that they received any training at all, was that you don't listen to them because they're going to claim that they're experts and that they actually think that they know best and that these programs should stay. And to be truthful, that's exactly what we were saying.
On February 3rd, 2025, Elon Musk posted this on X, quote, "We spent the weekend feeding USAID into the wood chipper. Could gone to some great parties. Did that instead." End quote. It's safe to say that no one needed Musk's savage imagery. It's also worth pointing out that by now, a year later, the barely trained Musk-led forces at the Trump administration's Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, have directly cost the jobs of over 250,000 people worldwide, and have, according to several published models, led to nearly 800,000 deaths worldwide, including more than 500,000 children. We may never know the exact numbers, but we do know that these harrowing figures were the result of a toxic mix of cruelty, arrogance, incompetence, ego, and ignorance. We know this in large part because Nick Enrich, the then acting assistant administrator of global health for USAID, both had a front row seat for the devastation and refused to stay quiet about what he saw. His book, Into the Wood Chipper, a whistleblower's account of how the Trump administration shredded USAID, defies belief, but serves as an invaluable document and bears witness to a still unfolding atrocity. I'm Christopher Wurst, and this is
Soft
Power.
Powerful.
Soft
Powerful.
Powerful stories.
Powerful.
Soft
Powerful stories.
So I was born and raised in Massachusetts, a town called Lexington, that those of us Lexingtonians who live there, fondly refer to as the birthplace of American liberty, because it was the place where the Revolutionary War started at the Battle of Lexington in April of 1775. Anyone who grew up in Lexington was forced into an indoctrination into an education about the Revolutionary War. And there's a famous quote from John Parker, who was the captain of the Minutemen. There's actually a statue of him on the battle green there in Lexington. And he has a quote that said, "Stand your ground, don't fire unless fired upon, but if they want to have a war, let it begin here." That's a quote that, everybody that grew up in Lexington kind of knows and thinks about. And it's something that's I've thought about quite a bit as I was writing this book and as I was going through the dismantling of USAID last year. I felt like it was my opportunity to stand my ground. And so I think that having grown up in the town of Lexington, Massachusetts, as I did, does kind of like reflect on my story to some degree. I knew I wanted to work in public service. My family was focused on public service. My father was actually an elected official in the town of Lexington. He was on the board of selectmen. I had always sort of grown up focusing on public service as a way to contribute. I hadn't decided on global health until much later when I was in college. I studied abroad in Kenya, doing a development and health program. And, it was in 2003, it was a time that the HIV epidemic was surging in Kenya and surrounding countries. And while I was there, actually, President George W. Bush enacted the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, or PEPFAR, which is maybe the largest and most impactful global health initiative in human history. And there was something about recognizing that my government was reflecting on the need to jump into this fight on a global level at the same time that I was, that something clicked for me. And I decided that that's how I wanted to contribute moving forward. I saw a lot of USAID vehicles and USAID branding and logos while I was in Kenya, just because it was sort of part of the study abroad program I was on. And even at that time, it sort of like brought me pride to see that my country was there with this flag that said "From the American People," and was working as official policy to make the world a healthier and happier place. It made me think that USAID was probably the place for me. So I would say by college, that's when I sort of decided that this was the career path that I was heading down. When Trump was elected in 2024, I had at that point been at USAID for about over a dozen years. This was going to be my fourth administration that I worked under. I came in to work specifically on tuberculosis, and over time became the director of the Office of Policy, Programs, and Planning for the Global Health Bureau, which basically meant that my job was to make sure that we were efficiently and effectively using global health funding to achieve our global health objectives, basically, and to find more effective and efficient ways to do that. When Trump was elected, there was definitely trepidation, right? We have been hearing on the campaign trail as Trump and his team were talking about their plans for the federal bureaucracy and wanting to traumatize the federal workforce, and so that we're very, very concerned about how we would be seen by our new bosses. But at the same time, I was really not very concerned about the future of foreign assistance in general. I tried to do quite a bit of research, as we always do when a new administration's coming in, to kind of like see what the new administration's plans might be for global health. And, that involved reading Project 2025, which didn't say anything about getting rid of USAID, and in fact had a lot of positive things to say about it. And then reading anything we could find about whoever would potentially be the political appointees that would be coming in. And in this case, as soon as we heard that Marco Rubio would be the Secretary of State, I think I felt more confident than ever, because he had been a huge advocate, maybe one of the biggest supporters of foreign aid throughout his career. And so that was actually quite reassuring at the time to see that he was going to be chosen for that role. The other thing that was coming in that was new was DOGE. And very naively, I'll admit that there was something about the idea of a Department of Government Efficiency and an outsider coming in to see how to make the government more efficient that actually appealed to me. And as I kind of mentioned, that was sort of part of my role, was to see how I could make our programs within global health more efficient. I had a bunch of ideas about what we could do to increase efficiency and sort of like break down some of the problems that we've been having bureaucratically that were standing in the way of our progress. And I had, again, naively made a list of what I thought that we could do. So I had that, and was looking forward to talking to the DOGE team about how we could work together to increase efficiency. Obviously, I never got that opportunity. When the Trump team came in and when DOGE came in, there was never an opportunity to discuss those. And it turned out that all my research on where I thought that things would go with foreign assistance were completely off base.
Do you remember, was there a moment when the light bulb went off that they were going to try to destroy this, that they were going to try to tear this down? And can you walk me through that?
Well, I'm not sure I would say that there was a single moment. It was sort of a path. I mean, the first thing that happened was on Inauguration Day. among the many executive orders issued by President Trump, one of them really caught my eye, which was it created a total freeze on foreign assistance. And I remember reading that and thinking that it must be a mistake, because obviously what he's trying to do here is reevaluate what foreign aid looks like and how it aligns with the president's priorities or whatever. But if it were taken at the letter of the way that it's written, he's talking about stopping programs that would interrupt clinical trials, that would shutter clinics, that would cancel emergency ambulance services, that would actually result in a lot of people dying. And I was like, okay, they didn't think this one out that carefully, and we'll just sit on this and wait until we get some sort of supplemental guidance. I'm sure that the Secretary of State will clarify what's actually meant here. Certainly, when I saw the executive order, I did not realize how much trouble we were going to be in. I thought that it was just a mistake. But a few days after that, we did get some supplemental guidance from Rubio, and it actually did confirm those fears, because it was requiring a stop work orders to be issued to all of our implementing partners. And that actually was going to start to cause those interruptions and have those really terrible implications for our programs around the world right off the bat. And at the same time, the political appointees that had come into USAID issued a really kind of ominous communications ban that prevented us from engaging with our implementing partners, who were panicking about what they were hearing from these stop work orders, but also prevented us from talking to any external partners, including our sister agencies. So we were not able to talk to our state counterparts, our colleagues at CDC. We were not able to talk to people at UN agencies like the World Health Organization. And so at the exact same time that our programs were being frozen in this kind of unprecedented and terrifying way, we weren't allowed to do anything to try to coordinate how this could be resolved. A few days after that, things really started to get worse when DOGE came in, and one of their first actions was to put the approximately 60 most senior career officials at USAID onto administrative leave without any warning or notice or explanation, honestly. And so now we had our programs frozen, unable to communicate, and our leadership had been decapitated. And it was in that context that I guess I would use the word promoted, although I don't think of it that way, to be the acting assistant administrator for global health, the top global health position at the agency, which was kind of really terrible news at the time. And I should say that I didn't get a phone call from the acting administrator or an email from somebody saying, will this work for you? This is what we're thinking of doing. Nobody talked to me at all. In fact, there was an agency notice that went out to the entire 15,000 people who work at USAID that said, okay, now that your career official leaders are gone, here's who's going to be in charge. And there for global health, it said my name. And so that was sort of how I learned about it. That was when I really knew we were in trouble. There was some good news that came on the day that I was designated as the head of global health. And that was that Rubio had issued a waiver to the pause on foreign assistance for life-saving humanitarian assistance. And honestly, this felt like the one moment of sanity, which was kind of of course, they didn't want all these people to die as they evaluate what our programs look like. And this is the kind of clarity moment where we can continue our programs as they evaluate them so that we're not causing these truly devastating interim impacts. And so from the first day that I took that role, I realized, hey, okay, this is my number one responsibility. We've got big problems here, but we can do everything we can to restart our life-saving programs. And so again, even by then, I didn't realize that things were really over. I thought that was kind of this moment of clarity. And I spent the next several weeks becoming increasingly frustrated, but trying everything I possibly could to restarting our programs. It was honestly terrifying for me, and I know it was terrifying for many of my colleagues. There was this weekend in early February when Elon Musk was tweeting like 50 times about how USAID it was a criminal organization, and we were Marxists who hate American, and we were, a ball of worms, and Trump was piling on saying that we were run by radical lunatics. And that culminated in a very early tweet on the morning of February 3rd, when Elon Musk tweeted that he had just spent the weekend feeding USAID into the wood chipper. That was sort of that weekend and culminating with that tweet was a bit of a watershed, because I was having staff and my team members reach out to me and say, hey, what are we doing? Are we supposed to even go into the office? Is this completely over? Do we still have our jobs? Is it safe? I mean, we're kind of being threatened here and being kind of vilified in a bit of a scary way that a lot of people didn't feel comfortable even taking their commute into the office, because they weren't sure if there was going to be somebody trying to deal with the criminals. For me, I tried to take a deep breath and say, I might lose my job as I'm in this leadership role, and I might be asked to do things that I'm not comfortable doing. And all I can just do is know where my line is and know that I'm not going to cross it, and just try not to be intimidated. And so that was something that I tried to tell my staff, that all we can do is the best that we can. We can't do things that are illegal. And if we end up losing our jobs, that's what's going to happen. But what we should not do is get scared into doing things that we're not comfortable doing. And honestly, that was much easier said than done. And frankly, as I discuss in my book, there were many occasions when despite having told myself not to be intimidated, I was intimidated. And I ended up, in the name of trying to restart these life-saving programs, I took several steps that I probably should not have taken, and under other different circumstances wouldn't have, because I thought I need to be able to work from within the government structure to save these programs, because if there's any chance that our life-saving work can be restarted, I need to make sacrifices in order to make that happen. And so I did things that I shouldn't have done, ranked our staff members to be placed on administrative leave, which was, just not an appropriate thing to do. Or I had to give the okay to terminate some of the contracts that we needed. Again, all in the name of trying to save a small kernel of our team to be able to restart our programs, and to save a small number of our contracts to be able to do the most critical life-saving programs. And it wasn't for several weeks later until I realized that this is actually a farce anyway. There was no opportunity to restart those programs. They were never going to let us do that. They had broken our systems too completely, and the political appointees were too vindictive and cruel to allow us to utilize the waiver that the Secretary of State had provided. And ultimately, that's how long it took me to realize that what I'm doing is being complicit, and what I need to do is stand up and speak out and explain what's actually going on in here. I'll never forget my first meeting with the political leadership of USAID. This is in the context of our programs being frozen and our communications banned and our leadership being decapitated. And at the same time, we've got Musk tweeting and Trump tweeting about how terrible we are. And they're actually in our building, ripping the USAID sign off the wall and taking the pictures out of the picture frames. I mean, this is the context that I had my first meeting with the political leadership of USAID and was like, is there anything that I can do to get them to understand the importance of the programs that they have frozen right now? And it was a disaster. I mean, so I gave them a quick briefing. They wanted to understand what the critical programs were in global health. And so I gave them, I was like, I don't know how much interest they're going to have. So 5 minutes, let me explain the very high level strokes of what we do in infectious diseases like tuberculosis, malaria, HIV, what we do in maternal and child health, what we do in family planning, what we do in nutrition. And that's it, just so that they understand, this is the breadth of our programs. And what I was met with, just kind of this stunned silence from the head of this agency. For example, the chief of staff was like, wow, I had no idea that you did all this. When I think of what USAID did in global health, I just assumed it was just abortions. I think that was February 5th or I think February 5th. And the day before, February 4th, most of our staff had been placed on administrative leave. I started to recognize, wow, these people who didn't even know what we did, who just assumed we did nothing, were happy to get rid of our staff before even trying to figure out what the agency did. And so it was just one thing after another to demonstrate that it wasn't just that they didn't understand anything about what we did in global health or international development. The reality was these people did not understand like how government worked. And so they would just continuously get frustrated as they would on the one hand break our bureaucratic systems, but like our payment system, for example, or put our experts on administrative leave, for example. And then they would get frustrated when they wanted to restart a particular program because there was like a news report about it. And they couldn't figure out how to do that because they had broken everything that would allow us to restart those programs. And they would just kind of get mad at each other. And there was one moment when same chief of staff, Joel Borkert, got very frustrated because he realized some of the impacts of the cuts that had been made in, I think it was in tuberculosis at the time, and wanted to restart those. And I, explained that our entire tuberculosis division was currently on administrative leave and couldn't be accessed. And his response was kind of just like smacking the table and saying, you see, this is why you might be able to do this at Twitter, but it's not going to work here. The political leadership and DOGE were not in sync whatsoever. And it was just kind of like chaos because the leadership that was put in charge was not competent and not informed and certainly not qualified to run a federal agency. And they were, especially the DOGE folks, were pretty competent at tearing a system apart very quickly, but they just were totally unable to deal with problems as they arose. And that's what kind of like led to such catastrophic effects. Even if they had, even if Rubio had actually wanted the waiver for life-saving humanitarian assistance to be utilized, it was impossible because of the damage that DOGE had done and because of the ineptitude of the political appointees that were there. There's a very, very concerning and problematic Ebola outbreak happening right now in DRC and to some degree in Uganda. And the US government's response is delayed at best, I'll say. But, I'm not really surprised by this because the last Ebola outbreak was happening in late January and February of 2025 when I was still there and in this role. An Ebola outbreak is an all hands on deck. What we usually do is provide surge support. We pull in folks from other teams to deal with this because it's an extremely deadly infectious disease, and our job is to deal with an infectious disease outbreak like Ebola it's a national security issue, and speed is of the utmost importance. And when we had this outbreak in Uganda in 2025, I just watched as over and over and over again, we were prevented from implementing any of our response efforts. I mean, they wouldn't even let us screen passengers in airports to make sure that passengers that were getting onto international flights didn't have symptoms of Ebola before flying potentially onwards to Europe or the United States. Or they wouldn't allow us to move PPE that we had already purchased and pre-positioned right by the Ugandan border, and just in case of an outbreak like this one, they wouldn't let us move it because the warehouse that it was sitting in was operated by the World Health Organization, and we weren't allowed to talk to them. And again, that's necessary to keep healthcare workers safe from infection. These are people who are on the front lines of an outbreak. But I continued to push throughout that outbreak to get them to allow us to restart some of our work. And by late February, I was kind of explaining this is taking weeks, and these are interventions that we normally would be implementing within hours. And at one point, I was basically just told we should stop bringing up Ebola, that we were never going to be approved to restart Ebola activities because, according to the head of the Bureau for Humanitarian Assistance, a guy named Tim Meisberger, Ebola is a scam. And so, that was another sort of watershed moment. It also happened to be the day before Elon Musk spoke at the White House and said that he had restarted all the Ebola activities. But, obviously that was a lie. And in actuality, DOGE was terminating all the contracts that we needed to do the Ebola work at the same day that Elon Musk was standing at the White House saying that he had restarted the activity. So it was just this kind of anti-scientific ignoring of experts, indifference to the impact that it would have, and just absolutely no problem with lying publicly about what was going on. I think Ebola was a good example of how they would downplay and mismanage such a serious global health issue. But it was just one example of basically what was happening in all of our health and disease areas. It should make people nervous, I think, when they see another and frankly much more out of control Ebola outbreak that we have right now. How are we going to be prepared for? I don't think Ebola is likely to be the next pandemic that's going to come to the United States in the way that like COVID did, for example. But I think we've seen how far back we've been set in terms of pandemic preparedness, in terms of outbreak response, that really makes the U.S. a lot less safe for whatever might be the next actual pandemic threat.
What else could people in the United States, in the middle of the United States, who don't pay a lot of attention, start looking for that are direct results of these actions taken against USAID and development work?
USAID kept us safe here in America in a lot of ways. And infectious diseases is probably maybe the easiest to envision. I think that we all know from having lived through the COVID pandemic that infectious diseases do not recognize international borders. And when there's an infectious disease threat somewhere in the world, it's a potential threat to everywhere in the world, including here in the United States. And so, since the COVID pandemic, USAID has invested a ton of money in improving a global early warning and detection system to ensure that countries have the capacity to, identify potential outbreaks and respond to them before they could potentially spread. And that's kind of the system that we have completely walked away from and have given up on over the last year or so. And I think we're already starting to see from the current Ebola outbreak, from the recent hantavirus outbreak, just within the last few weeks, we've seen a couple of examples of how far backwards how much ground we've lost in pandemic preparedness just in the last year or so. Again, hantavirus and Ebola, these are not things that I think everyday Americans need to be concerned about necessarily. But when the next potential threat of like a respiratory illness that might be a pandemic risk, we're going to be that far further behind in terms of our ability to respond to it. And I think that's something that everybody should care about. I don't think you need to necessarily be worried about American national security to be upset about the cuts to USAID and the way that the US government has abandoned its commitment to improving global health. I mean, there are people dying in this Ebola outbreak that didn't need to die, and it's a horrible disease that they're dying from because the systems that USAID had set up, the services that we provided were taken away. And again, they weren't taken away to eliminate waste. They weren't taken away to better align foreign aid with the president's priorities. They were just taken away by a bunch of unqualified and uninformed sycophants who were trying to satisfy the ego of Elon Musk. And yes, people should be concerned about what we've lost from USAID from a national security perspective, but I also think that people should be upset about the idea of taking away this relatively tiny investment, less than 1% of the federal budget, that was saving like millions of lives. Studies show that USAID's work saved over 92 million lives over the last 20 years alone, and 750,000 people have already died unnecessarily due to the cuts. And that's sad, and it's terrible for America. And I believe that you don't have to be worried about the national security aspect to recognize that that shouldn't be the face of the United States.
What was the moment when you sort of said, because you had to have been going against your bureaucratic instincts that had been pounded into you in your time in the job. At what point did you say that this is too big and I need to do this?
I think I said earlier that I probably waited longer than I should have, and if I could do this again, I would have spoken up earlier. But as you say, I was a bureaucrat. I was not an advocate or an activist. My job was to administer the policies of the administration, and even if I didn't agree with them, that was my job. And so it's not an easy decision to recognize that what you're actually being asked to do is not just pursue a policy agenda that you don't necessarily agree with, you're being asked to do illegal things, you're being asked to do unethical things, you're being asked to do things that put public health and safety in jeopardy. And that's not okay. Like that's a violation of the oath of office that all civil servants swear to uphold. And so for me, it was when I finally realized that there was no opportunity to restart our life-saving programs. It was a very specific day late in February when DOGE terminated about 5,000 of our contracts, including all the ones that we really needed to restart life-saving programs. It dawned on me that my priority was not anymore to implement this waiver that the Secretary of State had put out there, but my priority was, the priority for my team was to bear witness to what was happening. It was illegal and it was destructive and it was going to create historical lasting impacts. And what I decided was that if I was going to remain silent and try to continue to work from within the government, I was not only not going to be able to accomplish what I had thought I would, but I was actually going to be complicit, and I was no longer comfortable with that. So I decided that I needed to speak out and I needed to tell the world exactly what we had done to try to restart our programs and how we had been stopped at every turn, and to let them know, what the impacts of that were going to be. Because I needed to kind of expose the lies of the administration who were, on a daily basis at that point, saying publicly that our programs were working, that life-saving activities had restarted, and it just wasn't true. And so, I wasn't naive at that point. I did realize that I was going to lose my job and my career was going to be over. But I worked with my team to put together a series of memos to document exactly what we had tried to do and how we had been stopped and what those impacts were going to be around the world, and sent those out early in March. And the same day I was, not surprisingly, put on administrative leave, and that was the end of my career.
It's something I think that looking at it through the frame of bearing witness is really important. And I know that there are a lot of people out there that have reticence about stepping forward, even though they have been witnesses to bad things that have happened. But I also note the reaction to your book, and it seems to have really, really touched a nerve, and people seem to be really reacting to it. And I wonder if you find a correlation there.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I was sort of expecting when I wrote this book that it would get a fair amount of attention among the foreign assistance community, and especially former USAID staff who were, happy to see a record of what had happened. But I was quite surprised that it did get attention significantly beyond that group. And I'm glad it did because it's not just a story about USAID or a story about foreign aid. It's a story about what can happen inside any government agency when the executive branch decides that they are going to dismantle an agency that's been established by Congress. And it's an amazing story about how quickly that was able to happen when nobody stood up and spoke out against it. And I think it's kind of a warning for what of our other democratic institutions are potentially at risk. The story that I hope people will take away from it is that whether they are a federal government employee or they work for a law firm or an educational institution where their voices are being stifled, or whether they're just like around in their neighborhood, they need to understand that there are times when the situation is no longer okay and you need to stand up and speak out. And I hope my story is just an example that normal people make important decisions every day, and that when and if the time comes for them, that they will make the choice to speak out when they need to before it's too late.
When we get to, and I'll say when, we get to starting to rebuild, I wanted to ask you, what are the pieces that you most want to first put in place? If you were part of the rebuilding team, what are the things that absolutely need to be in place as we go forward with the next iteration of development?
First and foremost, there needs to be an independent agency that administers foreign aid and development assistance, because I think we're already starting to see that folding the last remnants of it into the State Department is not going to have the intended effect. And that's because it's a separate pillar of foreign policy, for the same way that we would not say that we should fold the State Department into the Department of Defense, because they're separate pillars of foreign policy, right? We have defense, we have diplomacy, and we have development. And if we try to administer development from within the diplomacy framework, what we'll end up doing is losing the value that there was from development. I think that we're already starting to see that in the what's being called the America First global health policy, where these bilateral memorandums of understanding are being developed that basically are extorting or extracting incredible guarantees and access to mineral resources and agreements to take deported immigrants from America in exchange for life-saving drugs and things. And it seems to have ignored everything we've learned about what works in international development over the last 6 decades. And so I think I would start there and start with a reminder of the value of having an independent agency that is kind of the embodiment of American generosity and goodwill to rebuild partnerships. It's going to take some time. I mean, we've lost a lot of trust, but I think starting with the understanding that there is inherent value for Americans to rebuild those relationships, and that trust is probably where I would start.
Nick Enrich is the author of the New York Times best-selling book, Into the Wood Chipper, a whistleblower's account of how the Trump administration shredded USAID. He's a former civil servant who worked at USAID under 4 administrations. He served as the Bureau of Global Health's Director of Policy, Programs, and Planning until January 2025, when he was designated as USAID's Acting Assistant Administrator for Global Health. On March 2, 2025, he was placed on administrative leave for exposing the Trump administration's illegitimate and dangerous dismantling of USAID, and was removed from federal service later that year. His prior roles at USAID included leading the critical coordination structure in the Bureau for Management and as the tuberculosis program team lead in the Office of Infectious Diseases in the Bureau for Global Health. Prior to joining USAID, Nick served as a Presidential Management Fellow at the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. He holds a law degree from Brooklyn Law School and a BA from Tulane University. Into the Wood Chipper is available online or wherever you get your books. Thanks so much for listening. If you liked what you heard and you haven't already, please follow us wherever you get your podcasts. Leave a nice review and get in touch with us. We would love to hear from you. You can do that at softpowerfulstories.org. There you'll also find out more about our guests, see pictures of them in action, find links to their work, and more. My name is Christopher Wurst. I am the host and producer of Soft Powerful Stories. Until next time.